A tough, leather-clad biker cruising down the street, feeling invincible. His roaring motorcycle breaks the silence of the quiet neighborhood, but then he does something unimaginable. Without warning, he kicks a dog just for the thrill of it. It's a shocking act that would leave anyone speechless. But here's the twist. This isn't just any random dog. It's Jason Statham's beloved pet. Yes, you heard that right. The action movie legend, known for his fierce roles and no-nonsense attitude, is about to find out exactly what happens when someone crosses the line with his furry friend. Now, you might be wondering, what could possibly happen next? I mean, this is Jason Statham we're talking about. The guy who's taken down the toughest foes on screen and always comes out on top. Does this biker really have any idea who he's messing with? Or is he just out there thinking he can get away with anything? Well, he has no clue what's coming his way, but trust me, it's something no one could have predicted. The situation escalates quickly, with the biker totally unaware of the storm he's about to unleash. Jason, who's known for his cool demeanor and precise martial arts skills, doesn't take kindly to anyone hurting those he loves, especially his dog. In that moment, he goes from being the calm, collected action star to someone who's ready to take action in a way that only he can. But here's where things get interesting. The biker, oblivious to the storm brewing, continues on with his reckless behavior, maybe thinking that he'll get away with it. But Jason isn't the type to let something like this slide. The dog's yelp still rings in his ears, and the thought of some random stranger hurting his pet sends a rush of adrenaline through him. Now, it's not just about protecting his dog, it's about showing this biker that there are consequences to such senseless cruelty. So, what happens when these two worlds collide? How does Jason respond to this unbelievable situation? Does he take the high road, or does he unleash something much bigger? And will the biker realize too late that his actions have made him a target? The tension is rising, and it's about to explode in a way you won't believe. Stick around, because you won't want to miss the wild turn this story is about to take. What happens next might just leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice, revenge, and the lengths someone will go to protect what matters most. Get ready for a story that's about to hit harder than a punch to the face. As the biker speeds down the road, the sound of his engine roaring through the quiet neighborhood, he seems completely at ease, living in his own world of leather jackets and adrenaline-fueled rides. He doesn't seem like the type to get caught up in anything more than a quick thrill. But what he doesn't realize is that his thoughtless act of kicking a defenseless dog isn't just a random moment of aggression. It's a spark that could ignite something far more dangerous than he's prepared for. This biker, let's call him Danny, is no stranger to trouble. He's the kind of guy who thrives on living on the edge, often picking fights where he shouldn't and testing limits wherever he goes. In his world, it's all about asserting dominance and having fun, no matter who gets hurt along the way. People in his circle see him as a bit of a rebel, someone who'll do whatever it takes to make a scene. But deep down, there's a darkness to him, a sense of entitlement that often leads him to believe he can do whatever he wants without facing any real consequences. On the other side of the equation is Jason Statham. To the outside world, he's known for his roles in action movies, where he's the guy who always comes out on top. But the truth is, Jason's life is far more grounded than the characters he plays. Off-screen, he's a quiet, reserved man who values loyalty above all else. His dog, a loyal companion that's been by his side for years, is one of the few things he truly lets his guard down for. Jason treats his dog like family, which in his mind means he'll do anything to protect it. And when he hears about the incident, the rage that fills him is nothing like the calm demeanor he usually shows in interviews or on set. Jason's close friends know him well. They know that when it comes to his pet, he's more protective than any father would be of his child. They know not to cross that line. But Danny, completely unaware of the storm he's just kicked up, carries on with his reckless ways, laughing off his actions and believing no one will dare stand up to him. After all, in his eyes, he's just a guy on a bike, living his best life, with no consequences in sight. But that's where he's wrong. What Danny doesn't realize is that Jason isn't the kind of guy to let an insult slide, especially when it comes to something he loves. It's not just about the dog being hurt, it's about the principle. It's about showing that no one, no matter how big or tough they think they are, gets away with disrespecting those who can't fight back. As Jason gears up to track down the biker, the tension between the two men builds. Jason isn't just acting out of anger. He's thinking carefully about how to handle this. He spent years studying martial arts, perfecting his body and mind, and he knows that any confrontation with Danny could escalate quickly. Jason's not out for revenge in the traditional sense. He's out to make a statement that says no one crosses the line with him or anyone he cares about without facing the consequences. Meanwhile, Danny's just riding, clueless to what's coming for him. He pulls into a local bar, laughing with his friends, boasting about his adventure. But deep down, he feels a strange sensation, like he's being watched. Maybe it's just his imagination, or maybe there's something more lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The stage is set. The players are in motion, and soon both men will collide in a way that neither of them is prepared for. What will happen when the biker finally realizes the gravity of his mistake? How far will Jason go to teach him a lesson? The suspense is building, and the next chapter of this story will change everything. As Jason drives through the streets, his mind races with thoughts of what happened earlier. The image of his dog, hurt and confused, keeps replaying over and over in his mind. He's been in countless fights on screen, facing all sorts of opponents, but this is different. This is personal. This time, it's not some choreographed scene. It's real. The anger he feels isn't just about a random act of cruelty. It's about protecting someone who can't defend themselves, about showing the world that there are boundaries you don't cross. Jason's not alone in his resolve, though. His close friend, Mark, who's known him for years, can sense that something's off. Mark, a former fighter himself, understands Jason's temperament better than anyone. He knows that when Jason decides to take action, it's not something that can be stopped easily. They meet up at a small cafe later that evening, and Jason's eyes are sharp, his movements deliberate. "I have to find him," Jason mutters, his voice low. Mark hesitates for a moment, watching Jason carefully. "You sure about this? You know how it can go. It's not just about the dog anymore, it's about proving a point." Jason's expression hardens. "I'm not letting this slide. If he thinks he can get away with kicking my dog, then he needs to understand that he made a mistake." Mark nods, understanding the gravity of the situation. "All right, but let's think this through. We don't want to end up in a mess that gets out of hand. We handle it smart." Meanwhile, Danny is still at the bar, totally unaware that his world is about to turn upside down. He's laughing with his buddies, recounting the thrill of the ride, not realizing that a storm is brewing just around the corner. His friends laugh along, enjoying the chaos he's known for, oblivious to the consequences of his actions. But Danny can feel something's not right. He doesn't know why, but there's a tension in the air, a sense that he's being watched, like the ground beneath him is about to crack open. He brushes it off, thinking it's nothing, just his imagination running wild after a long day. What Danny doesn't know is that Jason's already on his way. He's got the biker's number, literally. Jason's not the type to act recklessly. He's tracked Danny down, following leads and clues, piecing together his whereabouts like a puzzle. It's not just about confronting him anymore. It's about making sure that he understands the weight of his actions. Jason's methodical, calm, yet there's a raw energy beneath it all that promises a storm is coming. But there's more at play than just a confrontation between two men. As the night wears on, the tension builds. People around Danny start to notice his odd behavior. One of the bar regulars, a woman named Sarah, who's seen him around before, starts to get a sense that something's off. She watches Danny, wondering if he's been drinking too much or if there's something else going on beneath the surface. Sarah's been a part of this neighborhood for a while, and she knows when something feels wrong. Her curiosity peaks, and she decides to follow Danny once he leaves the bar. What she doesn't know is that her presence might be more important than she realizes. Her actions tonight could change everything. As Danny stumbles out of the bar, unaware of what's coming, Jason closes in. His pulse quickens, and his hand tightens around the keys to his car. He's getting closer, and with each passing second, he feels the weight of the decision he's about to make. He knows that once he confronts Danny, there's no turning back. And something tells him that Danny's not going to take this sitting down. The collision of their worlds feels inevitable now. Jason, steady and focused, is ready for whatever comes next. Danny, lost in his own thoughts and bravado, still hasn't grasped what's about to hit him. The tension between them builds, layer by layer, until it's almost unbearable. Both are walking toward a moment that will change their lives in ways they can't yet understand. And as the night grows darker, the atmosphere becomes heavier, and every step forward feels like a countdown to something explosive. The night had grown colder, and the streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the pavement as Jason's car slid through the streets. His hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, a storm was brewing. He could feel the anger building again, like a pressure in his chest that refused to be ignored. Each street he passed, each turn he made, brought him closer to Danny, closer to the moment of reckoning. The image of his dog, vulnerable and hurt, still fresh in his mind, pushed him forward. But even as he drew closer, Jason knew that this moment wasn't just about vengeance. It was about principle. He was about to make sure no one else would ever think they could get away with hurting someone he cared about. Danny, on the other hand, was stumbling down the alley behind the bar, still oblivious to the danger lurking just around the corner. His laughter had faded, replaced by a gnawing feeling of unease that he couldn't shake. Every step he took seemed to echo louder in his ears, and the cool night air felt heavier, as though something was closing in around him. His eyes scanned the shadows, but all he saw was the dim light of the street ahead. The more he tried to shake the feeling of being watched, the more it gripped him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it, choosing instead to press on, desperate to push away the creeping sense of dread. In the distance, Jason's car coasted to a stop. The headlights flickered out as he parked, just a few blocks away from where Danny was now. Jason had been tracking Danny for a while, and he knew the streets by heart. He knew the patterns, the routes the biker liked to take. He knew the exact moment to strike, but there was still something in the back of his mind, a voice telling him to be careful, to think it through before diving headfirst into the unknown. But this wasn't just about strategy anymore. This was personal. Sarah, the woman from the bar, had made her decision. After watching Danny's uneasy behavior, something inside her told her to follow him. She didn't know why, but she felt an instinct pushing her to act. Maybe it was just her gut telling her something wasn't right, or maybe it was the way Danny had seemed so out of place, so reckless. As she trailed behind him, staying just far enough to remain unnoticed, her heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't explain why, but she knew she couldn't let him out of her sight. The quiet night around them seemed to hold its breath as Sarah's footsteps grew more urgent. Danny, now half-drunk and getting more agitated by the second, started to walk faster, his pace quickening as he approached the end of the alley. His mind was scattered, and his confidence was slipping. Was someone following him? He glanced over his shoulder, but there was no one in sight. He shook his head, telling himself it was nothing, just his imagination, or maybe the alcohol playing tricks on him. Still, the feeling of being watched was inescapable, like a shadow that clung to him. He reached the corner, his hand resting on the brick wall, just as a low hum of an engine revved in the distance. The sound was faint at first, almost inaudible, but it grew louder, closer. His pulse quickened. Jason's foot hit the gas pedal. The engine rolled to life, and he eased the car forward, slow and deliberate, not wanting to announce his presence too early. He could see Danny now, at the edge of the alley, silhouetted against the faint light of the street ahead. This was it, the moment. Jason's heart was racing, but his focus was sharper than ever. There was no room for hesitation. Suddenly, Danny froze. He turned his head slowly, as though sensing something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The sound of the engine grew louder, unmistakable now, and Danny's eyes narrowed as he caught sight of the headlights cutting through the darkness. He stiffened. In that instant, a chill ran down his spine, and all the bravado that had carried him through the day suddenly felt empty and hollow. He knew without a doubt that this was no coincidence. Whoever was in that car wasn't here for small talk. Jason's car came to a halt just a few feet away. The engine shut off, and for a moment, everything was eerily silent. The tension in the air felt thick, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Jason's gaze locked onto Danny's, steady and unflinching. He stepped out of the car slowly, every movement calculated, every muscle in his body taut with purpose. His eyes never left Danny's. Danny's pulse raced, his instincts kicking in. The unease in his gut had turned into a full-blown panic. He had no idea who this guy was or what he wanted, but he knew one thing: this wasn't a situation he could walk away from easily. "Who the hell are you?" Danny's voice trembled, but he tried to mask it with a growl. Jason's expression didn't change. He took one step closer, and the silence between them seemed to stretch on forever. All that could be heard was the distant hum of the city, the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. And then, just as Danny took a step back, something else moved in the shadows behind him. Just as Jason stepped forward, ready to close the distance between him and Danny, a sudden movement in the shadows behind the biker caught his eye. It was swift, almost imperceptible, but Jason's trained instincts locked onto it immediately. For a split second, he hesitated, his focus momentarily shifting from Danny to whatever was lurking just beyond the alley's edge. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and an uncomfortable sense of urgency swept over him. Danny, still trying to steady his breathing, had no idea what was about to unfold. His gaze was locked on Jason, and he could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him. But that moment of stillness was shattered by a sudden sharp movement, so quick that Danny didn't even have time to react. A figure emerged from the darkness, stepping out from the alley's shadow, and in that split second, the world seemed to tilt. The figure was tall, wearing a heavy hood and a dark jacket, their face partially obscured by the shadows, but their presence was undeniable. Jason's eyes narrowed, his heart racing. This wasn't just some passerby, and it wasn't a coincidence. Whoever this person was, they were here for a reason. Before Jason could process what was happening, the figure lunged forward with surprising speed, tackling Danny to the ground. The impact was so sudden that both men were thrown to the concrete, and Danny let out a grunt of surprise and pain. For a moment, everything went chaotic. The sounds of struggle filled the air, muffled curses and grunts, the rush of bodies hitting the pavement. Jason stood frozen for a second, unable to move. What was happening? Who was this person? And why had they intervened? The stranger didn't seem to care who was watching. With practiced efficiency, they moved, pinning Danny down with one swift motion. The biker's muffled cries echoed in the dark alley, but his words were lost in the intensity of the struggle. Jason's gaze flicked between the stranger and Danny, his mind racing. There was no time to think. Whatever this was, whatever this new player in the game was, Jason had to act fast. Without a second thought, Jason moved toward the altercation, his instincts pushing him forward. As he approached, the figure turned slightly, catching sight of him, and for a moment, their eyes locked. Jason felt a chill run down his spine. There was something familiar about that gaze, something he couldn't place, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. His focus was on Danny, who was now gasping for air, struggling beneath the stranger's weight. "Who the hell are you?" Jason shouted, his voice low but urgent. The stranger didn't respond, their expression unreadable in the shadows. They were too focused on keeping Danny pinned, making sure he couldn't escape. Jason's patience was wearing thin. "I don't know what your game is," he said, his voice tightening with frustration, "but you don't get to interfere with me." The figure's movements were fluid and precise, almost too efficient, like they were trained in some kind of combat. There was no hesitation in their actions. It was like they had been waiting for this moment, waiting for exactly the right time to make their move. And now, with Danny struggling beneath them, it was clear. This wasn't a random act. This was calculated. Just as Jason was about to take another step forward, the figure's voice rang out, cold and calm. "He's not the one you need to be worried about." Jason froze. The words hit him harder than he expected. For a brief moment, his mind stalled, trying to comprehend the implication. What did that even mean? Who was he supposed to be worried about? And why was this stranger so sure of themselves? Before he could gather his thoughts, a figure spoke again, their voice now tinged with something darker, more foreboding. "This is bigger than just him. There's something you don't know, something you don't understand." The sudden shift in tone, the cryptic message, left Jason unsettled. His instincts told him to act, to take control of the situation, but now doubt crept into his mind. What was going on? Why had this stranger intervened, and what did they know about the situation that he didn't? The figure's eyes narrowed as they studied Jason, almost as if weighing him. "You don't want to make this worse," they said, their voice dropping to a near whisper. "You have no idea what you're up against." Just as quickly as they'd appeared, the figure stood up, releasing Danny with a final push, and then disappeared back into the darkness, vanishing as quickly as they had arrived. Danny, still reeling from the sudden attack, scrambled to his feet, his breath heavy, his face pale. But Jason was too stunned to even move. His heart pounded in his chest, but the adrenaline had turned into confusion. Who was that person? And why had they come after Danny? What did they mean by something bigger? Jason stood in the alley, the silence now suffocating. His mind raced, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The story had just taken a turn he hadn't anticipated, and now more than ever, he realized that this wasn't just about protecting his dog or confronting a reckless biker. Something far more dangerous was lurking in the shadows, and it was clear now that the stakes had been raised higher than he could have imagined. Jason stood frozen in the alley, trying to process the stranger's cryptic words, but before he could make sense of anything, Danny, now panting and shaken, stood up, his legs unsteady. The biker's eyes darted around the darkness, clearly unsure of what just happened. But the moment was fleeting. The strange figure was gone, vanished into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. Jason didn't have time to waste. He stepped forward, his jaw set, his gaze fixed on Danny. "What the hell is going on here?" Jason's voice was low, but it carried a weight that could not be ignored. Danny didn't answer right away. His hands were trembling, and he wiped the sweat from his brow, as if trying to shake off the remnants of the sudden encounter. Danny's eyes met Jason's, but there was something different in them now. Fear. "You don't understand," he muttered, his voice shaky. "I didn't mean to. I don't even know who that guy was. But you need to leave it alone." Jason clenched his fists, stepping closer, his anger mixing with the confusion that gnawed at him. "Leave it alone. After everything you've done. After you hurt my dog, and now you're telling me to just walk away." He took another step, his voice rising. "Who was that person? Why did they stop me?" Danny flinched, taking a step back. His expression had changed from defiance to genuine terror. "It's not just you. It's about more than just us. He's part of something bigger, something I'm not even sure I can get out of." His eyes darted nervously, like he was waiting for someone, or something, to come out of the shadows. Jason's mind was racing. The words hung in the air, thick with mystery. Something bigger. This wasn't just a petty act of violence. This was a message, a warning. He could feel it. But from where? From who? Before Jason could press Danny further, the sudden sound of tires screeching filled the air, followed by the roar of an engine that quickly grew louder and louder. Jason spun around, his senses on high alert. A sleek black motorcycle rounded the corner, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The rider's face was hidden behind a helmet, but there was no mistaking the way they handled the bike, precise, controlled, like someone who had been doing this for years. Jason's body tensed as the motorcycle came to a halt just a few feet away. The rider dismounted, pulling off the helmet to reveal a familiar face, one that made Jason's blood run cold. It was Mark. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He didn't understand. What was Mark doing here? Why was he with the person who had just attacked Danny? Mark, what the hell? Jason demanded, taking a step back, his hands raised in confusion. But Mark's expression was unreadable. There was no warmth, no camaraderie, only a cold, calculated look. "I'm sorry, Jason," Mark said, his voice heavy with regret. "I didn't want it to come to this." Jason's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle finally beginning to fall into place, but just as quickly, the truth hit him with the force of a wrecking ball. Mark had known about everything. He'd known about Danny, he'd known about the biker's twisted actions, and he'd known about the shadowy figures pulling the strings. Mark was connected to something far darker than Jason could have ever imagined. But it didn't stop there. The person who had tackled Danny, who had spoken in cryptic riddles, wasn't just a random figure. They were part of a larger network, a dangerous underworld Mark had been secretly involved in, an underground group with connections to criminal activity and who used intimidation and violence to control people like Danny, people who were too far in to escape. Jason felt the ground beneath him shift. He'd been blindsided. Mark, his old friend, the one person he thought he could trust, was part of this web of lies and deceit. "I never wanted you to get caught up in this," Mark continued, his voice tinged with guilt. "But you're too close now. It's too late for you to back out. This is bigger than anything you're ready for." Jason's fists clenched so tightly his knuckles went white. Betrayal burned in his chest. He had always trusted Mark, had thought of him like a brother, but now that trust was shattered, leaving only questions. Why had Mark done this? What was his real role in all of this? How deep did this web go? Before Jason could react, Mark turned to Danny, his expression changing. "We need to move now. They'll be here soon." Jason's mind reeled. Who's coming?" Mark didn't answer, only gave him a look that said everything. Whatever was happening next wasn't something Jason could control. Not anymore. The danger was real, and it was closing in fast. Just as Mark started to walk away, the sound of more motorcycles filled the street. More figures emerged from the shadows surrounding them. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he realized the scope of the situation. This wasn't just about him and Danny anymore. It was a war, a dangerous, ruthless war between those who controlled the streets and those who didn't stand a chance. And the worst part? Jason was already in the middle of it. The stakes had been raised higher than he could have ever prepared for, and now, no matter how hard he fought, there was no going back. The question wasn't what would happen next. It was whether Jason would survive long enough to uncover the full truth behind the shadowy forces pulling the strings. The flashing lights of the police cruisers slowly dimmed, and the sirens faded into the distance as Jason stood there, taking in everything that had just unfolded. His mind was racing, but the shock was slowly starting to wear off. He had been part of a plan, manipulated into this web of lies and criminal activity, and now it was over. But the weight of it all, Mark's betrayal, the shadowy figures, the underground world that had been just beneath the surface of his life, was enough to make his stomach churn. As the last of the bikers were loaded into the back of the police vans, Jason felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Sarah standing there, her face a mixture of concern and relief. "I had no idea," she said softly. "I thought I was just helping you get your dog back. I didn't know how deep it went." Jason looked at her, shaking his head. "Neither did I. I never thought it would go this far. I didn't even realize how deep Mark was into all of this until now." Sarah nodded, her eyes still scanning the scene. "It's over now, though. You stopped him. You stopped all of them." Jason took a long breath, but the weight of her words didn't quite sink in. It wasn't just about stopping Mark. It was about understanding the scope of the world he had unknowingly entered. He had thought it was just a fight over a dog, something small, something he could fix. But in reality, it had been much larger than that. The truth was darker than anything he could have imagined. As the last few bikers were escorted away, Jason turned his attention to the street. The danger was over, but the damage remained. His life was different now, forever changed. He had lost a friend, someone he had once trusted like family. He had learned that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. Jason glanced down at the street, his eyes finding the spot where Danny had stood just moments before. The biker was still there, but now, with the police gone and the dust settling, he was just another man caught up in a bigger system. Jason wasn't sure if he felt sorry for him, but there was something in his eyes, something that said he knew he had made a terrible mistake. "Is he going to be okay?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. Jason turned to her, his voice softer than before. "I don't know, maybe, but that's not my fight anymore." As they watched the last of the officers leave the scene, Sarah placed a hand on Jason's arm. "What's next for you? You don't have to keep chasing this. You've done your part." Jason looked up at her, his eyes tired but resolute. "I'm not sure. Maybe I'll finally get some peace. Maybe not. But I'm done running from this. It's time to face whatever's next." With the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty street, Jason turned and walked away from the wreckage of his old life. The dog, the biker, and even Mark. They were all part of a story that he could never fully erase. But in the end, Jason knew one thing for sure: he had taken control of his own fate. The twists, the betrayals, and the dark underworld that had pulled him in were no longer in charge. The world wasn't as simple as it had once seemed. It was more complicated, more dangerous, but in some strange way, that was okay. He had faced the darkness head-on and come out stronger. And maybe that was the most important thing he could take away from all of it. As he walked into the night, a sense of closure began to settle in. Jason had learned the hard way that sometimes the battles we fight aren't the ones we expect. But in the end, they shape us in ways we could never predict. And for now, that was enough.